I'm Sarah Chifo, Senior Vice President of Government Affairs at the League of Conservation Voters. And I want to thank you for joining us today as we launch the 2025 National Environmental Scorecard. Last year was unprecedented in so many ways, and the torrent of attacks on our environment and our democracy simply did not let up. And the 2025 scorecard tells that story. We saw a Trump-aligned congressional majority harm our environment, drive up energy costs, and cede power to the president, all while advancing big polluters' wish list. The most significant vote of the year was the Big Ugly Reconciliation Bill. This legislation is the most anti-environmental bill in our nation's history, which is why we double score it. It attacked clean energy and climate progress, undermined manufacturing jobs, increased toxic pollution, and enriched billionaires and the fossil fuel industry, all while making our electricity, healthcare, groceries, and other bills more expensive. In fact, last year, families' energy bills rose 13%, and communities across the country lost major investments and over 165,000 clean energy jobs as manufacturing and clean energy projects were upended by these attacks. Again and again, we saw the Republican-led House and Senate try to sell off our public lands to fossil fuel companies and corporate billionaires. And they attempted to hand more power to President Trump to shut down the government and approved his extreme nominees. The executive branch, congressional majority, and the Supreme Court also advanced significant attacks on our democracy and on voting rights. The House passed the SAVE Act, which would make it harder for tens of millions of people to vote, including married people who changed their names, and over 100 million eligible voters without passports. And we all heard at this week's State of the Union, President Trump is doubling down on pushing for these voter suppression bills ahead of the midterms. Thankfully, in contrast, we saw Democrats in the Senate and the House fight back. They forced votes protecting clean energy, maintaining critical staff and programs that protect communities, public lands, and safeguard our clean air and our clean water. We're honored to have three incredible climate champions joining us today, each of whom has been leading the fight against these attacks on clean energy, on our environment, and on free and fair elections. As a reminder to our reporters on the call, please put your questions into the chat and we'll get to them at the end of the speaking program. Now, without further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce our first congressional guest, an environmental justice and climate justice champion who has served in both chambers of Congress and is the first Black person to represent Delaware in the United States Senate, none other than Senator Lisa Blunt Rochester. You are a tireless advocate, Senator, for our communities, for clean air and clean water and climate action, and protecting our families, and yes, your beloved grandkids from pollution. You've been a key leader on the Senate Environment and Public Works Committee, and you have a stellar 98% lifetime score. We are so grateful that you are leading the way in Congress and grateful you could make time for us today. So to kick things off, Senator Blunt Rochester, I'd love to ask you, why do you think LCV's scorecard is an important and valuable tool?
Well, first of all, Sarah, thank you so much for having me. And thank you to LCV for the work that you do each and every day. I will tell you, for our team here, Team LBR, we gave out a little, we call it kind of like moleskin notebook when we had our retreat. To talk about what am I going to do as Delaware Senator. And while we had a theme of trying to bring some bright hope, there were three P's that we want to focus on, and they're purpose, peace, and planet. So every day in front of us, we have the reminder of our why we're here. And I think why this scorecard is so important and so valuable is because knowledge is power. And the fact that you shared, even as people go to the voting booths, they need to have the knowledge of who's fighting for them and who's kind of lax. And so when I think of even the state of Delaware, you probably, as you know, we're considered the lowest mean elevation state in the country. And a lot of people see us as a little state, but they don't recognize that we're urban, suburban, rural, and coastal. And so for us, we feel the effects of climate change. It's not just a theoretical thing. It's not a political thing. It is a reality. It is a reality for our farmers. It is a reality for our coastal communities and not just the expensive houses that might be on a beach, but inland, where when it rains, it floods, and also for our environmental justice communities. And so when we look at what this means to our economy and our health and our, who we are, the rich beauty of our state, the work of LCV is vital. So for us, we look forward to the scorecard constantly. I was glad to see we got this 98%, overall. I was like, what do I need to do to get the other 2%? That's how important it is to me. That's how important it is to my constituents, because people need to know so that we here can be held accountable for what we do.
So beautifully said, Senator Blunt Rochester. Thank you. And thank you for being a bright spot of hope in these difficult times. And I love that purpose, peace, and planet and knowledge is power. We could not agree more. Now, to go to a little bit of a low mark, right? In 2025, congressional Republicans and the Trump administration advanced a barrage of attacks on clean energy. Energy that is the fastest and the most affordable to bring online at a time when prices are skyrocketing and energy demand is growing. Thank you for all you did to speak out and fight back against these attacks. The most sweeping of which was the Republican reconciliation bill. But I'd love to hear you talk a little bit more about the impacts on the ground in your state of these clean energy rollbacks.
Right. It was interesting just this week. I think, we had a president give the longest State of the Union speech. And in that State of the Union speech, I think he spent maybe 2 minutes talking about the rising energy costs that all of our constituents are facing each and every day. And so, first of all, when you look at what is the priority of this administration, is it to create good paying jobs, which we know that the work of LCV and others with, whether it was the Inflation Reduction Act and some of the historic bills that we passed, were poised to create good paying jobs, save the environment, keep us competitive as a country. And instead, they're rolling back all of these things for special interests, I would say. And we're seeing just from the bill, that the one big beautiful bill that some people call the one big ugly bill, or some people call it the big bad bill, whatever you want to call it. I call it the taking us backwards bill. We're seeing the shutdown of major clean energy projects. Communities around the country lost over 165,000 clean energy jobs. And the elimination of the clean energy tax credit and tax credits like the EV credit or the energy efficient home improvement tax credit. I mean, like, who could be against making your home more energy efficient? These things, and even the clean energy tax credit saved Americans $8.4 billion in 2023 and helped lower utility costs. So it's gone in the wrong direction. And then you even look at things like these CRAs. I don't think, Americans even know what that was before this. And so for us, it's important to remember that even with this bill, the genie's out of the bottle. People know what it means to have cheaper, cleaner, better energy. And in Delaware, we're in a very tough position because, many places might be able to have their own energy production. We don't have what other states have. And so we really, for us, creating more opportunities for clean energy has been important and continues to be important. Right now, that's what really is going to be the focus. And despite the talking points, we know that solar energy is cheaper. We know the impacts of, energy rates in my state are predicted to go up by 95% by 2032 if we keep on this trajectory. So we're going to continue to shine a light on what that bill did because people need to know. It goes back to the knowledge is power. And then we're going to continue to fight to move forward.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Senator Blunt Rochester, for putting that so plainly. These attacks, couldn't agree with you more. They make no sense, especially at a time when, costs are front and center, and these are really good jobs that are being impacted and our global competitiveness, as you said. Final question I have for you is, these environmental attacks that we saw waged across the year of 2025 has real impacts on communities and our air and our water and public lands. And I'm wondering if you want to close with any additional reflections on the human side of the
Yeah.
impact.
Yeah, well, again, back to why the scorecard is so important. I briefly mentioned the CRAs that, were put forward. I think if I recall in 2017, back when I was first elected to the House, was kind of the first instance that I started hearing about CRAs. And you know, I don't even think many members even knew what the heck this tool was. It was supposed to be a rare tool that was used. And over the last year, under the second Trump presidency, 22 have become law. And most of those were environmental. And over this past year, they have basically weaponized this against EPA regulations that were put in place based on science. Let's be clear, those things were done based on science. And it's been used to really punish states that don't align with the president's environmental policies. And I voted against all of them. But we also know that we have, you know, we have to like pay attention to what this administration is doing. And like I said before, I think now people have tasted what the future could look like, and we can't put the genie back in the bottle. I think a lot about communities in my state who did not have access to clean drinking water. And I'm not talking the 1930s or the 1940s. I'm talking the 2000s. And so the work to make sure that these folks who have been advocating and fighting for environmental justice, it is front and center for my office, for my team. And I think in this moment, it's important to keep people's faces in front of us. The kids who are suffering from asthma, who maybe live next to a toxic dump. Um, you know, I keep in the front of my mind those individuals. I keep in the front of my mind people that I was Secretary of Labor in Delaware. So I said, if I had another middle name, it'd be Lisa Blunt, Jobs Rochester. I'm always thinking about jobs and how to strengthen our economy. We have so much potential. And so to me, I keep those things in the front of my mind, even as we continue to stand up, to fight, and to raise awareness of what's happening. We have to stay in this fight together. My theme has been keep your eyes on the prize. Keep your eyes on the prize. The prize is protecting our natural, beautiful resources and lands. The prize is clean drinking water and clean air. The prize is being able to thrive and be healthy. Um, to me, we got to keep our eyes on the prize. And I am just grateful to organizations like LCV that have your eyes on the prize, and we're going to do it together. So thank you so much
Thank
for
you
all.
so Thank you so much, Senator Blunt Rochester. You are an incredible champion and partner, and we thank you for your time. Thank you, thank you. I'm now going to invite our next speaker, Congressman Luz Rivas from California, my home state. And Congressman Rivas, you came to DC with an incredibly strong record in the California State Assembly, and you've really hit the ground running. You've proven yourself a stalwart climate and environmental champion from day one. We're incredibly proud to be awarding you with that you've earned a perfect 100% in your first year in Congress. And you've really been an incredible advocate for public lands, for waters, and for communities on the Natural Resources Committee in the House. So thank you for being a determined advocate and for fighting back against the Trump administration's relentless attacks. We're so lucky to have your leadership in Congress. And thank you again for joining us today. We've got a few questions for you that we'd love to have you reflect on. The first is just setting the stage. What would you highlight about the value of LCB's scorecard?
Yeah, thank you, Sarah. Thank you for having me today. I'm honored to join other environmental champions like Senators Blunt Rochester and Van Hollen. I think the LCV scorecard is a great measure of keeping elected officials accountable to our communities, our public lands, our ecosystems, not just the ones that we represent. I'm in an urban area, but now that I've been a member of the House Natural Resources Committee for the past year, I think about our federal public lands all over the country and other issues that have come up in the committee, and how it's my responsibility to protect them too, because my constituents also benefit from them. I'm proud to earn 100% on this year's or the 2025 LCV scorecard. For me, having 100% means that I'm fighting for environmental justice, clean and affordable energy, access to clean air and water, and a strong and equitable democracy. I love that you include fair elections as part of your priorities. Over the past year, we've seen, Trump and Republicans sell off our public lands to fossil fuel companies. I'm in a committee hearing that I was in for natural resources. Some of the Republicans in the mic were saying, "Drill, baby, drill," when we were voting on some of these bills. And so it just emphasizes the importance of Democrats fighting back against these takeovers that they're trying to do. They're trying to erase decades of environmental policies that were designed to protect our communities. As Trump continues to sell off our public lands, to big polluters, I will continue fighting to protect environmental justice communities like mine in the San Fernando Valley of Los Angeles.
Thank you, Congressman Rivas. So well said. And I actually want to pick up on the democracy points that you raised. Unfortunately, we saw real attacks on our democracy and really an effort to advance voter suppression laws, including the SAVE Act in the House. Republicans' extreme attempt to make it harder for eligible voters to register to vote and make their voices heard in our democracy, which is essential to making environmental progress. We'd love to hear more from you on the harms of this and similar legislation that is still being advanced and pushed this year.
Yeah, the SAVE Act, I've heard a lot. I've gotten messages from constituents about this, like, don't let this happen. And it's because they're trying to find ways to end free and fair elections, because they know they can't win if things are fair. And instead of working with us to make life more affordable for Americans, address the impacts of climate change, work towards clean water and clean air, instead they're pushing these false narratives that there's so much voter fraud, because they want to place barriers between voters and the ballot box. These barriers will affect millions of people, including people that live in environmental justice communities like mine. They want to intimidate us from voting, from our right to vote. And, we can't ignore this. I've heard from a lot of women that are concerned over, your last name at birth, especially if they've changed their names as when they got married or for other reasons. They feel like they're being disenfranchised by the SAVE Act. And so we need to continue fighting for that. And I think most Americans would agree, just let everyone vote. And why shouldn't this be fair? So, I think it's great that LCV also fights for that.
Well, thank you so much, Congressman Rivas, for being on the front lines of fighting for environmental justice in your district and really across the country. And thank you so much for fighting for what is a fundamental right, not a privilege, in our democracy, and that's the right to vote. Thank you so much for all you do and for your partnership. I'm now going to turn to Senator Christiane Hollen, who is our final speaker. Senator Van Hollen, thank you so much for joining us today. You've represented Maryland in both chambers of Congress and been a tireless advocate for our environment, our communities, and our planet. You're a dedicated defender of protecting public lands and waters, including the treasured Chesapeake Bay. You fought to accelerate clean energy and the good jobs that they bring and to defend our democracy. You're a senior appropriator. You've had a frontline seat in fighting back against these attacks, and we could not be more grateful for your leadership, standing up for the federal civil servants doing good work every day, for fighting for public health protections, and to standing up on the terrorizing of our communities, our neighbors, and immigrant populations in this country. With that, I'd love to open the floor to you to start with a reflection on what you see as the value of LCV's scorecard.
Well, Sarah, first of all, it's good to be with you and everybody tuning in here. And thank you and LCV for all that you do to help protect our environment and public health. And it is great to be here with colleagues. I was just catching the tail end of Congresswoman Rivas's statements, and I want to thank her for her steadfast advocacy in support of our environment. Of course, my colleague in the Senate, Senator Blunt Rochester. So I've heard the word come up before, but I think it's the appropriate one, which is accountability. I think voters have a lot of things going on in their lives, right? They're being pulled in all different directions, and they need a trusted source to keep track of how members of Congress are voting on issues that they care deeply about. And that's what LCV does. And you are that credible, trusted source. So when a voter doesn't have time to look into every detail of every vote and every policy issue, they know that they can turn to the LCV scorecard to find out how members of Congress voted. And at the end of the day, accountability is absolutely essential to making sure that our democracy works the way it's supposed to work, because that's what accountability is about. And we all know that voters are faced with a blizzard. In addition to having a lot of things going on in their own lives, they're faced with a blizzard of information, including lots of misinformation. So if they can just go to the LCV scorecard and look at that source and say, aha, I know how that member of Congress voted on things I care about. So that's why I'm grateful to, that you do what you do. And I'm proud to have gotten 100%.
Wonderful. Well, thank you. And that accountability cycle is a really important one to LCV. And it really cuts through the noise, as you said, of members. Some elected officials like to claim that they fight for clean air, clean water, and climate action, but the scorecard tells when the votes come up, who do they side with, the public or polluters? That's
right. Rarely will you find a member of Congress saying in public that they're against clean air or clean water, but then they vote, to essentially let the polluters get away with dirtying our air and our water. So again, that's why this is such an important scorecard.
Thank you. Thank you. Now, unfortunately, over last year and continuing into this year, we've seen your colleagues in Congress on the other side of the aisle really cede power to President Trump, especially over control of government spending. You spoke up consistently and helped push back, and we score an amendment that you offered during debate of the reconciliation bill that sought to reinstate congressional authority over congressionally directed spending. Can you share more about why you offered that amendment and what is so dangerous and at stake with what President Trump and OMB Director Russ Vought's blatant power grabbing?
Yeah, I'm really glad you scored this vote. And it's another example of where LCV plays such an important role because, this was a vote that, many people did not fully understand what its implications were, but they were very damaging when it comes to our environment. So essentially what the Republican bill did, what we call their big ugly bill, they did a lot of damage, as we know. I mean, with tax cuts to the rich, cutting Medicaid and other social programs, but also really attacking the environment. But one of the things they did was give this big slush fund to one of the members of Trump's team that has been attacking the environment by going after federal government agencies like EPA and other environmental agencies and trying to decimate them, right? Somebody who invited Elon Musk in with this chainsaw to go after programs that are designed to protect clean water and clean air and the public health. And his name, of course, is Russell Vought. He's sort of the guy in the budget cockpit, I call him. He's over at the White House. He's the one that tells different, federal agencies what money they can spend and on what they can spend it, and also often has been ignoring, unfortunately, congressional directives, which is why we have so many lawsuits going on as well with illegal impoundments. But the crazy thing is, while he wanted to cut deeply into other people's budgets, he wanted to give himself a big slush fund. So essentially they put $100 million into a fund for Russ Vought to use at his entire discretion, right? This is a person who publicly said that one of his goals is to inflict trauma, that's his word, on federal workers who are doing, important work on behalf of the American people, including in all the environmental areas that you follow so closely. So he gave himself a slush fund that almost doubled his annual appropriation. And Republicans just went ahead with giving him a blank check. So he, of course, is the guy that helps, try to undo important environmental protections through the regulatory process. He's the one who has essentially held up funding for important environmental programs. And so I'm really glad that you flagged this for people, because in some ways in all the flurry of activity, it didn't receive the attention it deserves, but you provided the spotlight on this, because $100 million to Russ Vought, he can and will do a lot of damage. And so anybody who voted for that was essentially giving a slush fund to somebody who would get a 0, I'm sure, on the LCV scorecard.
Thank you so much, Senator. I think if we had negative scoring on the scorecard, Mr. Vought would receive a negative score. And thank you so much for naming him and putting a spotlight on his abuse of power and the consequences for our environment and so much more. Thank you so much for joining us today, Senator Van Hollen. We appreciate your partnership and your leadership. Congratulations again on your 100% score, which you've earned so well. Thank you for your leadership.
Thank you, Sarah, and thanks for all you and your team do.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
All right. Bye-bye. We are now going to turn to my colleague, Matthew Davis, who is our Vice President of Federal Policy here at LCV and has a deep hand in scorecard. And we're going to talk a little bit more about the scorecard details before we open it up for questions. So please keep those questions coming in the Q&A chat, and we will get to them momentarily. All right, Matthew. Can you walk us through a summary here? We heard a lot of good commentary from our 3 congressional guests about the consequences and the importance of the scorecard and the consequences of these attacks. But can you tell us the kind of votes that were included in the 2025 scorecard?
Sure thing, Sarah, and thank you so much for leading us through, and thanks to our congressional guests. Fantastic to have a chance to listen to them reflect on the year and our scorecard. So this year, we saw a record number of votes across the 2 chambers in the 2025 scorecard. That includes 34 Senate votes. Those votes included things like 11 different amendments showing where members stood on affordable clean energy, manufacturing jobs, public lands, pocket rescissions, as we just talked about, and federal workers. Those were amendments to the Big Ugly Bill, and also the Big Ugly Bill's final passage, which, as you mentioned, we double scored. 7 nominees picked solely for their loyalty to Trump and the fossil fuel industry. Folks like his so-called energy trio of Burgum, Wright, and Zeldin. 13 Congressional Review Act resolutions of disapproval attacking clean air and water, energy efficiency, wildlife, and public lands, and we heard Senator Blunt Rochester talking about those extensively. And then on the House side, there were 32 votes, which included 8 bills driving up energy costs by either blocking clean energy or making bigger and better handouts and giveaways to the fossil fuel industry. And then, of course, also the final passage of the Big Ugly Bill, which we scored in that chamber, double scored in that chamber as well. We had 4 different bills undermining public input on decisions that affect the quality of our environment and our public lands and our communities. The SAVE Act, which you've already highlighted, that makes voter registration so much more onerous for tens of millions of eligible voters. And then again, those 13 Congressional Review Act attacks on air, water, energy, and wildlife and public lands that we scored on the Senate side. So that just gives you a little bit of a snapshot of what was included in those 66 votes across the chambers.
Sure is a lot of votes, Matthew. Thank you for running through those and bucketing them in such a helpful way. Out of those 66 votes, if you could pick one vote that defined the year for the scorecard, what would it be?
Yeah, without a doubt, HR 1, the Republican Reconciliation Bill, also known as the Big Ugly Bill or the Big Bad Bill. I think we heard Senator Blunt Rochester mention, it did so much damage to our communities and our environment. It attacked affordable clean energy, driving up costs for Americans all across the country and threatening hundreds of thousands of jobs, over 160,000 jobs. Sold off hundreds of millions of acres of public lands and waters to the fossil fuel industry and other extractive industries, zeroed out environmental justice programs, zeroed out pollution prevention programs. And this is all in service of providing bigger tax handouts and tax breaks to millionaires and billionaires. You talked about it, and Senator Blunt Rochester talked about it too. I mean, it was such a consequential vote. It tore away the historic investments in clean energy, in climate action, and in environmental justice that were contained in the Inflation Reduction Act. And because of those things, and because the Inflation Reduction Act being the biggest ever action on climate at the federal level, we double scored in 2022. We double scored the Big Ugly Bill, undoing those things in 2025. So yeah, I think for me, 2025 could really well be defined by that one bill, the Big Ugly Bill.
Thank you so much, Matthew. And this year's scorecard breaks a few records. Can you share what those were?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. And, Sarah, we've been talking about this already, right? 66 votes across both chambers. It's the biggest number of votes ever because of that torrent of attacks that you were talking about earlier. And then the other record that we saw was the number of Congressional Review Act resolutions of disapproval that passed Congress and were signed by the president. Senator Blunt Rochester mentioned the total number, 22. About 18 of those were attacks on the environment, clean air, energy efficiency, wildlife, public lands and waters. And we only had space for 13, and that is a huge number of attacks. So we scored 13 of those. We also saw the CRA being used to attack things that are not supposed to be eligible for disapproval by Congress. Both the Government Accountability Office and the Senate Parliamentarian agreed that those things were not eligible. So. But that did not stop the Republicans from moving forward. Again, as the senator, junior senator from Delaware was mentioning, things like the waivers to California to allow them to have tighter emission standards for cars and trucks than the federal standards, so that they can clean up their very challenging air pollution problems in California. That is an agency order given to just one state. Yet the Republicans attempted to undo that, and were successful, at least in getting it through both chambers and getting the president to sign it. We also saw them attack resource management plans, which also are agency orders and are not eligible for review by the Congressional Review Act. Those those attacks meant that public lands protections and management plans to guide the use of our public lands in a way that balances recreation, subsistence uses, religious uses, and industrial uses as well. Those things that had public input and years of consultation, science, and traditional ecological knowledge informing them were ripped away by these illegitimate Congressional Review Act resolutions. So we will see what the courts say about whether they're illegal or not. But in the meantime, it means that public lands are less what it means in the meantime is that public lands are less accessible for millions of Americans. Their air is going to be dirtier, and they're going to pay more for their transportation.
Thank you, Matthew, for laying that out so well. As I started out the call saying, this was an unprecedented year in so many ways, and thank you for underscoring some of the really lowlights of what that unprecedented level of attacks and the extreme nature that Congress went to and the administration went to roll back protections that are widely popular and very important for public health, lowering costs, and good jobs. With that, I want to invite our folks on the call to put their questions in the chat. And Tim, if you're still on, I'd like to invite you to ask your question.
Hey, thanks. Looks like I got the numbers answered, so I don't need that. But could you put this broadly into the context of the midterms and LCV's strategies going into them?
Yeah, thank you so much for the question and for joining our rollout call today, Tim. The way I will address that is what the Trump administration and congressional Republicans are doing in terms of rolling back bedrock protections for clean air, clean water, access to public lands, turning them over to polluters, and going head on against the clean energy solutions that are the fastest and most affordable to bring online. We will be working to make sure that the public knows about those attacks, who's responsible for them, and the consequences of them. And as we saw looking backwards to the 2025 elections, we saw a playbook around energy affordability and clean energy being the solution as a really popular platform to run on in Virginia and New Jersey, and of course in the Georgia PSC elections. And that really is a playbook that I think brings a lot of promise for the midterms that are ahead.
Thank you.
Thanks. Do we have any other questions at this time? All right, I'm not seeing any. So thank you all for joining us, and we will be able to answer any questions you have directly if you want to follow up one-on-one, but otherwise, thank you so much for helping us roll out the 2025 National Environmental Scorecard. Have a great day.